The ultimate goal of apartheid was to make South Africa a white country with every black person stripped of his or her citizenship and relocated to live in the homelands, the Bantustans, semi-sovereign black territories that were in reality puppet states of the government in Pretoria. But this so-called white country could not function without black labor to produce its wealth, which meant black people had to be allowed to live near white areas in the townships, government-planned ghettos built to house black workers like Soweto. The township was where you lived, but your status as a laborer was the only thing that permitted you to stay there. If your papers were revoked for any reason, you could be deported back to the homelands. To leave the township for work in the city or for any other reason, you had to carry a pass with your ID number, otherwise you could be arrested. There were also a curfew. After a certain hour, blacks had to be back home in the township or risk arrest. My mother didn't care. She was determined to never go home again. So she stayed in town, hiding and sleeping in public restrooms until she learned the rules of navigating the city from the other black women who had contrived to live there, prostitutes. Many of the prostitutes in town were Zosha. They spoke my mother's language and showed her how to survive. They taught her how to dress up in a pair of maid's overalls to move around the city without being questioned. They also introduced her to white men who were willing to rent out flats in town. A lot of these men were foreigners, Germans and Portuguese who didn't care about the law and were happy to sign a lease giving a prostitute a place to live and work in exchange for a steady piece on the side. My mom was not interested in any such arrangement, but thanks to her job, she did have money to pay rent. She met a German fellow through one of her prostitute friends and he agreed to let her a flat in his name. She moved in and bought a bunch of maid's overalls to wear. She was caught and arrested many times for not having her ID on the way home from work, for being in a white area after hours. The penalty for violating the pass laws was 30 days in jail or a fine of 50 rand, nearly half her monthly salary. She would scrape together the money, pay the fine, and go right back about her business. My mom's secret flat was in a neighborhood called Hillbrow. She lived in number 203. Down the corridor was a tall, brown-haired, brown-eyed Swiss-German expat named Robert. He lived in 206. As a former trading colony, South Africa has always had a large expatriate community. People find their way here. Tons of Germans, lots of Dutch. Hillbrow at the time was the Greenwich village of South Africa. It was a thriving scene, cosmopolitan and liberal. There were galleries and underground theaters where artists and performers dared to speak up and criticize the government in front of integrated crowds. There were restaurants and nightclubs, a lot of them foreign-owned, that served a mixed clientele, black people who hated the status quo and white people who simply thought it ridiculous. These people would have secret get-togethers too, usually in someone's flat or in empty basements that had been converted into clubs. Integration by its nature was a political act, but the get-togethers themselves weren't political at all. People would meet up and hang out, have parties. My mom threw herself into that scene. She was always out at some club, some party, dancing, meeting people. She was a regular at the Hillbrow Tower, one of the tallest buildings in Africa at that time. It had a nightclub with a rotating dance floor on the top floor. It was an exhilarating time, but still dangerous. Sometimes the restaurants and clubs would get shut down, sometimes not. Sometimes the performers and patrons would get arrested, sometimes not. It was a roll of the dice. My mother never knew whom to trust, who might turn her into the police. Neighbors would report on one another. The girlfriends of the white men in my mom's block of flats had every reason to report a black woman, a prostitute, no doubt, living among them. And you must remember that black people worked for the government as well. As far as her white neighbors knew, my mom could have been a spy, posing as a prostitute, posing as a maid, sent into Hillbrow to inform on whites who were breaking the law. That's how a police state works. Everyone thinks everyone else is the police. I know that there was a genuine bond and a love between my parents. I saw it. But how romantic their relationship was, to what extent they were just friends, I can't say. These are things a child doesn't ask. All I do know is that one day she made her proposal. I want to have a kid, she told him. I don't want kids, he said. I didn't ask you to have a kid. I asked you to help me to have my kid. I just want the sperm from you. I am Catholic, he said. We don't do such things. You do know, she replied, that I could sleep with you and go away and you would never know if you had a child or not. But I don't want that. Honor me with your yes so that I can live peacefully. I want a child of my own and I want it from you. You will be able to see it as much as you like, but you will have no obligations. You don't have to talk to it. You don't have to play for it. Just make this child for me. For my mother's part, the fact that this man didn't particularly want a family with her, was prevented by law from having a family with her, was part of the attraction. She wanted a child, not a man stepping in to run her life. For my father's part, I know that for a long time he kept saying no. Eventually, he said yes. Why he said yes is a question I will never have the answer to. 9 months after that yes, on February 20, 1984, my mother checked into Hillbrow Hospital for a scheduled C-section delivery. Estranged from her family, pregnant by a man she could not be seen with in public, she was alone. The doctor took her up to the delivery room, cut open her belly, and reached in and pulled out a half-white, half-black child who violated any number of laws, statutes, and regulations. I was born a crime.